What is happening, everybody? Welcome to a UFC 302 breakdown. It's myself and Brady from DFS by the Numbers. If you guys can do us a favor while watching this, like and subscribe to both of our YouTube channels, both Stochastic as well as DFS by the Numbers. I'm going to be doing a full slate breakdown on Friday using the Sims tools we have here. And then Brady always has just an abundance of MMA content, really anything you guys could be looking for, from prize picks to betting to props to anything you could think of. Brady's covering it over on DFS by the Numbers. So go check out his channel. And in this video, we're going to give you guys some core plays to help you build out your Draftkings lineup, starting with the main event, Brady, which we have Islam Makhachev taking on Dustin Poirier. And I mean, we're both going to be picking Islam to win. So the question from a DFS standpoint becomes, with Islam being the most expensive fighter on the card, how many of our lineups do we want to have him in? And then are you taking any shots on Dustin Poirier on the other side?
I'll be taking a little bit of shots of Poirier just because he's 6,700. And if he does win, you can pretty much make any lineup you want. So a little bit of action on Poirier for sure. But the most of my exposure is going to be absolutely on Islam here. 9,500, but very expensive. But I think he's worth it here. He is going to be very high owned as well, but I just don't see a world where he doesn't go out there, get takedowns consistently, get control time, and then eventually get a submission in the second, third, or fourth round here. So I like Islam a lot. 9,500. I like it. I'm going to have a decent amount of them, but I will be sprinkling Poirier. I'm going to be very heavily exposed to this fight. It's going to be high owned, like I said, but I just don't really, I guess you can maybe try to get away with it a little bit, but I'm probably not going to be one of those guys. So give me Islam here. Going to have a ton of exposure to him.
Yeah, I'm going to be playing the chalk here. I will say the funniest possible outcome, if Poirier somehow wins by guillotine, it would be, number one, just the perfect storybook story for Dustin Poirier. If he somehow, this is the time he wins by guillotine and then he retires afterwards, it would be hilarious. Like, there's a part of me that's rooting for it to happen. It certainly wouldn't benefit my bankroll, though. I'm going to be super heavy on Islam. I honestly might even play Islam in 100% of my lineups. At a bare minimum, I'll probably have like 90% of Islam, and maybe I have like 10% shares of Poirier, just because he's certainly live to win. I just don't think it's going to happen. It wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if Poirier happens to knock out Islam on the feet at the start of one of the rounds. The only time we've ever seen Islam lose was when he got knocked out against Adriano Martin, and that was, I don't even know how many years ago, but he hasn't lost since then. So I'm not going to say Poirier has a 0% chance to win, but he's drawing pretty thin to win, and he's very reliant on getting some sort of fluky finish. So I'm picking Islam to win. So is everybody else, and for good reason. He's going to be the fighter I have the most exposure to on the entire card. But Brady, if you're paying up for a fighter who isn't Islam, either because you've got a Stars and Scrubs build, or maybe if you did have a lineup where you were getting off of Islam and getting to a different high-priced fighter, is there somebody else you have in mind that you like to spend up for?
Yeah, there's actually a couple I like up top as well, just because, and like you said, I think this is a Stars and Scrubs week for me. Like, there is a lot of fighters that I like in this higher price range. The mid range is kind of iffy for me this week, at least. So it's going to be a Stars and Scrubs week for me for sure. So yeah, of course, Islam up top is my absolute favorite play. And then after that, it's going to be one Jailton Almeida at 9,100. This is a lot more, I guess, dangerous than Islam, but I think he has a good chance to not only go out there, but go out there and get a win, and go out there and put up a really big score. So what I'm thinking is going to happen here is Alexander Romanov. Anytime we've seen him off his back, it has looked just atrocious, just terrible. Alexander Volkov was able to stuff a couple takedowns in that fight, and Romanov death gassed in about 60 seconds, and then Volkov TKO'd him shortly after. Juan Espino was able to get into mount very easily, and if Jailton Almeida gets a takedown here, which I think he will, I think the fight could be over very shortly after. It is, like I said, it's sketchy a little bit. I'm still not 100% sure about Almeida. I feel like both these guys are like really flaky. I feel like both these guys have a lot of quit in them. It's going to be a fight I'm very heavily targeted and invested in, but I think Almeida gets the takedown here, gets on top, and I think Romanov's going to not know what to do off his back. So I like Jailton. I think it could even come in the first round here, but if it's not the first, I think it comes in the second.
Yeah, so usually when we record these videos, Brady, I have like two options that I go into these conversations with, because then it's, if you bring up one guy that I like, I've got my secondary option to fall back on so that I could differentiate a little bit. But I'm in such strong agreement with you on Jailton Almeida. There isn't really another spend up option that I'm going to be prioritizing beyond Islam Makhachev and Jailton Almeida. Here's what really stands out. And I know there's the sumo background that we have for Romanov. And the big thing that's concerning, though, you brought it up. And while you were talking, I was bringing up the Juan Espino fight where Espino went 4 or 5 on takedown attempts against Alexander Romanov. He only defends takedowns at a 20% clip. And we just saw a fight between Jailton Almeida and Curtis Blades where how many takedowns did Almeida end up landing in the first round? And Blades is maybe the best wrestler we have in the heavyweight division, but Almeida is so much more athletic than these guys, and he's so strong that it didn't really matter. He was just able to physically force himself to get in top position against Curtis Blades. He ends up getting knocked out in the second round of that fight, but what was it? We saw Jailton Almeida went 9 of 12 on takedown attempts in the first round against Curtis Blades. Romanov is going to be easier to take down than Curtis Blades. And he's also, like you had said, not great off his back. So I don't think he's going to be able to fight to get back to his feet in the same way that we saw Curtis Blades do against Jailton Almeida, which ultimately ended up exhausting him. And then on the feet, I do have some concerns about Almeida's durability. We just saw him get knocked out by Curtis Blades. I don't think Romanov is that guy with that kind of power, though. So I think this is a very good matchup for Almeida to not only win, but score a massive score on DraftKings. So I like Almeida a really good amount as a pay up option for this slate. Him and Makhachev, the two that I'm going to be prioritizing. And you would also mention this is a very difficult fight card to find fighters to target in the mid range, which I totally agree with. But are there any particular fights or fighters that are standing out to you for any reason?
So there'd be one fight as a whole that I don't mind targeting, and it is that 8,000 matchup between Roman Kopylov and Cesar Almeida. It's a fight where I don't have a strong lean one way or another. A lot of people are on Almeida, and this line has actually flipped. It's now Almeida like minus 124, and then Kopylov plus 104. So I do think Almeida is going to come in here with some ownership. Very popular fighter, and yeah, I think this would be the one fight in the mid range where I would kind of target both sides because I think these guys are going to stand and bang here. Both these guys have a ton of power. Both these guys have a ton of knockouts. I think somebody does get knocked out here. My only concern is I think there's going to be zero grappling. I mean, if anybody mixes in takedowns, it's Kopylov, but I even doubt that. I think there's going to be zero grappling, not much control time, strictly striking. And if there's not a first round finish, if it comes in the second or the third, I'm not sure how well these guys are going to score. But I think they'd be the one fight, and then the one fighter in the mid range that I don't mind, just because if he's winning by finish. That's Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe has a 100% finish rate. He's 7,900. He's going against Jake Matthews, who quite frankly is just very inconsistent. So there could be a scenario where Phil Rowe's able to knock out Jake Matthews. We've seen Matthews knocked out before. We've seen him hurt before. Phil Rowe has a submission game as well. So I think Phil Rowe would be the one guy in the mid-range. I don't like it really at all, but, you can't ignore a guy with a 100% finish rate.
Yeah, I don't really like the mid range very much either. I do agree with you. The Almeida Kopylov fight, it is targetable. For me, I'm going to just shout out Randy Brown here just because I do think he should win the fight. I think he's relatively safe in the mid range. But once again, I don't think this is a range I'm going to have all that much exposure to. But Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos is 37 years old, and he's not looked great in his recent fights. I know a lot of people might look at the Rinat Fakhretdinov fight and say, like, hey, look, he was a 10-8 in that third round. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, he ended up looking good in the late stages. I think that was less about dos Santos and more to do with just Fakhretdinov completely gassing in the later stages of that fight, because the first couple rounds didn't look all that great for dos Santos. And, some of his fights before then, it was, the fight against Abubakar Nurmagomedov, that was pretty lackluster. And then there was also the fight against Benoit Saint-Denis where, yeah, he did look very, very good in that fight, but it was a different Benoit Saint-Denis. Like if they were to rematch now, I think Saint-Denis probably runs through dos Santos. So the age at 37 years old is concerning to me. He's also not been super active. He only has a couple of fights over the last few years. So Randy Brown, I do think, has the tools to win the fight, but he probably wins by decision. It's not a fight I like all that much. We just wanted to talk about Randy Brown being somebody who I think should win in the mid-range. But I think this is a really good stars and scrubs build. The other side of this, though, Brady, is who are you liking for cheap? Because I think there are a lot of cheap fighters with upside, but it's hard to figure out which ones you're confident might win.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot with the upside. I think a lot of these fighters, if they win the fight, they're going to score very well. And I like a lot of these, like I'm going to sprinkle a lot of these low priced underdogs, maybe outside of, I don't really like Ola Zaychuk that much. I don't really like Joe Selecki that much, but I think the others are definitely in play for me. Somebody that I don't mind is Paulo Acosta, 7,400. I'm not picking him to win, but I mean, it's a Sean Strickland fight. It's a 5-round fight. And the fact of the matter, it's probably gonna be close. A lot of these 5-round fights for Sean Strickland, end up being close, split decision type fights. And Paulo Costa, he has went 25 minutes before against Marvin Vettori, and his cardio looked strangely decent in that fight. Was able to go the full 25, no problem. Was able to have some success in that fight. So yeah, even in a loss here, like for cash games, I don't mind Costa because he's super tough. First and foremost, I think a lot of the finishing upside, especially early, is on his side. Sean Strickland's not really some murderous power puncher. So I think worst case scenario is Paulo Costa loses a 5-round decision where he puts up maybe 100 plus significant strikes. But in the best case scenario, he's knocking out Sean Strickland. He's winning a 5-round decision, which is going to score very well at 7,400. So my pick for the fight is Sean Strickland by decision. But I think this could end up being close, and Costa definitely has some paths here. So I like Costa, probably my favorite spot down low. But yeah, there's a couple spots sticking out for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you on Costa for a couple of reasons. We do see, and this is not a massive card, right? We've got 12 fights. If somebody ends up missing weight, we get down to 11 fights. This could be one of those scenarios where it's, hey, the winning lineup just has whichever cheap fighter scores the most fantasy points. There's a very high floor for Paulo Costa, in my opinion. I would be very surprised if Strickland finishes him. And then you get the scenario, like you said, it goes to decision. You're getting 100, 120 significant strikes, probably at a minimum for Paulo Costa. Maybe he ends up landing a takedown or two as well. So it's not hard to envision a scenario where Costa scores 50, 60 fantasy points in a loss and still ends up being good for cash games and even viable to be live in a winning lineup for tournament purposes. So, yeah, I'm with you. I like Paulo Costa a good amount. Another fighter I want to talk about here is Mitch Raposo. And I'm not super high on Mitch Raposo, but in this matchup, I think he should land takedowns because we know that Mitch Raposo has a wrestling background. And if you look at this fight on paper, Andre Lima has a big striking advantage. And I would think that means Mitch Raposo has to rely on his wrestling. And we just saw Andre Lima in his UFC debut against Severino, which was a super bizarre fight that ended in a DQ due to a bite. But also, we saw Lima taken down a handful of times in that fight. Igor Severino landed 5 takedowns on 9 attempts. If Severino was able to land 5 takedowns on 9 attempts, I think there's a path for Mitch Raposo to do that as well. It doesn't mean he wins the fight because I don't really know what kind of damage he's going to be able to impose. But if you get to a scenario where Raposo lands 5, 6, 7 takedowns over 15 minutes, you could get a really, really close, greasy type decision. And one that if Raposo was to win, it would probably score well on Draftkings because I view any scenario where he wins is going to have to come from him wrestling and landing takedowns. I'm sure he's aware of that. I'm pretty positive that's the game plan he's going to come in with. If that's the case, I think Raposo has some of the most upside of any fighter here that we're looking at for cheap. So anything else you want to add about this card here, Brady?
No, like we talked about, I think it's stars and scrubs week for me. Liking Islam, Charlton up top. Even don't mind Dustin for all the grappling upside he has, and then some of these low plays that you're not confident in. But I mean, one of these guys are going to come through. Like Costa might come through. Maybe Nico Price knocks out Alex Morono. Maybe Charlton does drop the ball and Romanov, gets a win there. So yeah, stars and scrubs for me. I think it's a very interesting slate. Not a ton of options. And hopefully we don't lose any fights because we really can't afford to. But yeah, a fun slate nonetheless.
And guys, thank you very much for watching. Once again, if you haven't done it, like the video, subscribe to both our channels, Stochastic as well as DFS by the numbers. Good luck with this week's card. We'll see you guys back here next week. Peace out. Have a great weekend.
See you.